Weddings have never looked more extravagant. Across the world, couples spend tens of thousands of dollars on ceremonies filled with lights, music, and promises of forever. Yet, behind the glowing photos and carefully staged vows, something darker is happening. The institution of marriage is quietly collapsing. The data is undeniable. According to the United Nations and the OECD, marriage rates have fallen to historic lows across the developed world. In the United States, the marriage rate has dropped by more than 60% since 1970. In countries like Japan and South Korea, entire generations are postponing or abandoning marriage altogether. At the same time, the average age of first marriage has climbed steadily into the 30s, while births outside of marriage now account for more than half of all children in parts of Europe. This is not just a matter of shifting preferences. When commitment disappears, families fracture. And when families fracture, the foundation of society itself begins to shake. What was once the cornerstone of stability, community, and continuity has become a fragile option that fewer and fewer people choose. Sociologist Zygmunt Bauman described this transformation as the age of liquid love. In his words, modern relationships are fluid, transient, and disposable, like liquids poured into different containers. Love still exists, but it no longer binds with the same permanence. It adapts to the demands of individual freedom and consumer culture, flowing from one vessel to another, always ready to evaporate. The paradox of our time is stark. On the surface, marriage has never been more celebrated. Social media is filled with glamorous weddings, perfectly staged proposals, and hashtags declaring eternal devotion. But beneath the spectacle lies a growing emptiness. Commitment has lost its weight, promises have lost their permanence, and marriage itself is quietly dying. If marriage is dying, the natural question follows: why? What has changed so profoundly that one of humanity's oldest institutions is unraveling before our eyes? The answer lies in a simple but unsettling truth. Commitment itself is disappearing. The British sociologist Anthony Giddens called this new form of intimacy the pure relationship. In his view, modern partnerships exist only so long as both partners feel emotionally satisfied. The relationship is maintained not by duty, tradition, or external pressure, but solely by the subjective happiness of the individuals involved. Once the feelings fade, the bond dissolves. Marriage, under this logic, becomes less a lifelong covenant and more a contract of convenience, renewable only while it continues to deliver satisfaction. American sociologist Andrew Cherlin reached a similar conclusion in his landmark study, The Marriage Go-Round. He argued that in countries like the United States, people still value the ideal of marriage, but they pursue it in a restless cycle of marrying, divorcing, and remarrying. This constant rotation erodes the authority of the institution itself. Marriage is no longer a binding anchor, it is a revolving door. The cultural shift is equally evident in the data. Surveys by the Pew Research Center reveal that younger generations no longer see marriage as essential to a fulfilling life. Among millennials and Gen Z, a majority believe that living together without marriage is perfectly acceptable, and many view marriage as optional rather than necessary. In other words, what once was a social expectation has become a personal preference. The shift from obligation to conditional choice marks a profound transformation. For centuries, marriage carried weight precisely because it was not negotiable. It tied individuals into a larger social fabric, obligating them to responsibilities that extended beyond their own desires. Today, the fabric is fraying. Commitment has become contingent, and institutions that once demanded permanence now bend under the pressures of individual freedom and personal fulfillment. This is the central thesis of our time. Marriage is no longer the unquestioned destination of adulthood. It has become one option among many, a temporary arrangement rather than a permanent foundation. The death of marriage is not sudden. It is the slow evaporation of commitment, the quiet replacement of duty with desire and of permanence with choice. If commitment has become fragile at the cultural level, it is not only because of changing attitudes. Institutions and economic forces have reshaped the terrain of intimate life. Marriage has not simply been abandoned by individuals. It has been undermined by the very systems in which those individuals live. Economist Gary Becker, who pioneered the study of marriage through the lens of economics, argued that the institution once thrived on what he called specialization. In traditional households, men specialized in earning income, while women specialized in caregiving and maintaining the home. Marriage created clear economic value by combining these complementary roles. But in modern societies, as women have entered the workforce and gained financial independence, the logic of specialization has collapsed. Marriage no longer provides the same economic benefits it once did. Claudia Goldin, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, deepened this analysis by showing how the structure of modern work itself strains relationships. She described the rise of what she called greedy jobs, demanding professions that consume disproportionate amounts of time and energy. In a labor market that rewards long hours and total availability, especially in law, finance, and corporate management, couples struggle to maintain balance. Dual-career households often face immense pressure, making stable marriages harder to sustain. Law has also shifted the calculus of commitment. Economists Betsy Stevenson and Justin Wolfers examined the impact of no-fault divorce laws, which allow one spouse to dissolve a marriage unilaterally without proving wrongdoing. Their research, published through the National Bureau of Economic Research, found that while these laws reduced domestic violence and even lowered suicide rates among women, they also weakened the incentives for long-term investment in marriage. When either party can walk away at will, couples are less likely to make what Becker called relationship-specific investments. Choices like buying a home, having children, or building joint financial futures. The law, in other words, has made marriage less binding and more provisional. Technology has transformed the landscape further still. Sociologist Michael Rosenfeld's landmark study, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2019, showed that online dating had overtaken family and friends as the most common way couples meet. This shift has turned intimacy into a kind of marketplace, governed by algorithms, swipes, and infinite choice. Partners are no longer discovered through shared communities, but filtered through platforms that resemble consumer catalogs. The result is a new form of commodification. Relationships evaluated as if they were products, always subject to replacement when a better option appears. Taken together, these institutional and economic forces form a perfect storm. The old logic of marriage as economic partnership has dissolved. The legal framework that once bound couples together has loosened. The technological platforms that mediate modern love have encouraged endless comparison and perpetual search. For men today, the implications are sobering. It is not only that commitment feels less natural, it is that the surrounding system actively discourages it. The rules of the game have changed, and they have changed in ways that tilt the playing field against permanence. Marriage, once supported by law, economics, and culture, now floats in a hostile environment. The erosion of external supports has left it fragile, contingent, and easily dissolved. What used to be the strongest social institution has been destabilized by the very progress. Economic independence, legal reform, technological innovation that defines modern life. The question is no longer why individuals hesitate to commit, but why any commitment could survive in a system designed to erode it. If economics and institutions have eroded the foundations of marriage, culture has dissolved its meaning. For centuries, marriage was not just a private arrangement between two individuals. It was a cultural script, a shared narrative that gave structure to life. But in the modern era, that script has unraveled, leaving individuals adrift in a sea of choice, uncertainty, and competing values. Zygmunt Bauman captured this transformation with his notion of liquid love. In his words, modern relationships are fluid, flexible, and easily abandoned, reflecting a broader cultural condition he called liquid modernity. In a world where permanence feels oppressive and freedom is the highest good, love no longer hardens into lasting bonds. Instead, it flows, evaporates, and reshapes itself with every new desire. Marriage, once the vessel that contained intimacy, is now perceived as a restriction, an obstacle to the fluidity of personal choice. Eva Illouz, in her studies of what she calls emotional capitalism, argued that the language of love has been colonized by the logic of the marketplace. Emotions are packaged, marketed, and compared like commodities. Dating apps encourage users to scroll through potential partners as though they were browsing a catalog. Romantic success is measured in efficiency, optimization, and satisfaction. In such a framework, marriage ceases to be a sacred covenant and becomes a high-stakes consumer decision, subject to cost-benefit calculations and vulnerable to buyer's remorse. Ulrich Beck and Elizabeth Beck-Gernsheim extended this critique with their concept of individualization. In their analysis, modern societies no longer impose a fixed life path, marriage, children, community, but instead demand that individuals construct their own biographies. Each life becomes a do-it-yourself project, a narrative that must be chosen and justified personally. In this climate, marriage is stripped of its collective authority. It no longer commands obedience as a social norm. It survives only if it fits the self-designed story of the individual. These cultural shifts are mirrored in popular media. Hollywood romantic comedies glorify the pursuit of passion, but rarely depict the hard labor of lifelong partnership. Pop music celebrates desire, heartbreak, and fleeting encounters more than it celebrates stability. Social media platforms amplify this ethos by rewarding novelty and spectacle. Lavish weddings trend for a day, but the struggles of daily married life remain invisible. Even dating culture itself has been gamified, with swipes and matches replacing the slow cultivation of trust. The cumulative effect is clear. Marriage no longer holds the same symbolic weight it once did. What was once an unquestioned milestone of adulthood has become one lifestyle choice among many. The language of permanence and duty has been replaced by the rhetoric of freedom and self-expression. And in the process, the meaning of marriage has melted into the wider currents of a liquid, individualized, consumer-driven culture. The erosion of culture is perhaps even more dangerous than the erosion of law or economics. For when meaning collapses, institutions cannot stand. Without a shared belief in what marriage represents, the structure becomes hollow. It is no longer a covenant, it is merely an option, fragile and easily abandoned. If culture has dissolved the meaning of marriage, psychology explains why so many individuals hesitate to bind themselves permanently. Beneath the grand narratives of economics and philosophy lies the quiet machinery of the human mind, pulling people toward freedom, novelty, and avoidance of long-term obligation. Barry Schwartz, in his influential work, The Paradox of Choice, showed that abundance does not liberate us, it paralyzes us. In a world where dating apps provide endless profiles and potential matches, each swipe promises that someone better might be waiting just beyond the horizon. Instead of leading to satisfaction, this abundance fosters anxiety, indecision, and regret. Why commit to one partner when thousands of others appear to be available? The psychology of infinite choice undermines the finality that marriage requires. Attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby and expanded by Mary Ainsworth, adds another layer of explanation. Early experiences with caregivers shape patterns of attachment that carry into adult relationships. For many, these patterns are secure, but for others, they are anxious or avoidant. Adults with avoidant attachment styles often fear dependency and intimacy, withdrawing when relationships demand deeper commitment. In an era where cultural narratives already privilege autonomy and self-fulfillment, these attachment insecurities find fertile ground. The result is a generation of adults who are emotionally predisposed to resist the very permanence marriage demands. Helen Fisher, a biological anthropologist who has studied the neuroscience of love, reminds us that the brain itself conspires against lifelong stability. Romantic love is driven by dopamine, the neurotransmitter of novelty and reward. Fisher's research shows that the thrill of new attraction activates the brain's reward systems in ways that fade over time. The novelty bias of the human brain makes us restless, longing for fresh stimulation rather than enduring stability. What was once an evolutionary strategy to diversify genetic reproduction now clashes with the cultural ideal of lifelong partnership. Even when individuals do marry, the expectations they carry can destabilize the union. Psychologist Eli Finkel, in his book The All or Nothing Marriage, argues that modern couples place unprecedented demands on marriage. In earlier generations, marriage was about economic survival and social duty. Today, it is expected to provide not only love and companionship, but also personal growth, emotional fulfillment, and self-actualization. Finkel's data show that couples who meet these lofty expectations thrive, but most lack the resources, time, energy, emotional skills to sustain them. When reality falls short of the ideal, disappointment sets in, and divorce becomes the release valve. Other voices in psychology echo this theme. Robert Sternberg's triangular theory of love emphasizes the balance of intimacy, passion, and commitment. Yet in contemporary culture, passion is glorified, intimacy is fragile, and commitment is optional. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, through their work on behavioral economics, revealed how humans are loss-averse. We fear losing more than we value gaining. Applied to marriage, this means many people avoid commitment because they dread the potential cost of divorce, financial loss, or emotional devastation more than they desire the benefits of stability. Taken together, these psychological insights reveal a sobering truth. The decline of marriage is not just a social trend imposed from the outside. It is rooted in the very architecture of human desire and cognition. Choice overwhelms, attachment falters, novelty seduces, expectations inflate, and fear of loss paralyzes. For men today, this means the struggle is not merely external, it is internal. The resistance to commitment runs through culture, law, and economics, but it also courses through the circuits of the brain and the wounds of the heart. To marry in the modern world is not only to defy social trends, it is to fight against the psychological currents of one's own nature. And this raises the question that cannot be avoided. If the individual mind itself rebels against permanence, can marriage still survive? The theories of economists, philosophers, and psychologists explain why marriage has weakened. But beyond theory, the numbers themselves tell the story with brutal clarity. Across nations, across decades, the trajectory is the same. Marriage is in decline. In the United States, census data show that the marriage rate has fallen more than 60% since 1970. In 1972, there were over 76 marriages for every 1,000 unmarried women. By 2020, that number had dropped to fewer than 30. Europe follows a similar path. According to Eurostat, marriage rates across the continent have fallen by almost half since the 1960s, while divorce rates have more than doubled. The age of first marriage has climbed steadily upward. In 1960, the average American man married at 22 and the average woman at 20. Today, the averages are 30 for men and 28 for women. In many parts of East Asia, such as Japan and South Korea, The average age is even higher, and significant numbers are choosing never to marry at all. Meanwhile, cohabitation without marriage has become the new normal. A Pew Research survey found that nearly 70% of Americans believe it is acceptable for couples to live together without being married. The United Nations reports that in parts of Northern Europe, more than half of all children are now born outside of marriage. In Sweden, the figure is nearly 60%. Divorce remains a defining feature of the marital landscape. After the liberalization of divorce laws in the 1970s, divorce rates surged across the developed world. While rates have stabilized or even declined slightly in some countries, they remain far above historical norms. In the United States, roughly 40% of marriages still end in divorce. These facts do not lie. They confirm what cultural analysis and psychological theory already suggest. Marriage has lost its place as the dominant organizing principle of intimate life. The trends are consistent across geography, culture, and time. Marriage is no longer the default, no longer the expectation, and often no longer the goal. The spectacle of lavish weddings may still dazzle, but the statistical reality is stark. The institution is shrinking, and in its place rise new forms of partnership: cohabitation, serial monogamy, fluid arrangements, none of which carry the same permanence. The data does not merely illustrate the decline, it makes it undeniable. Yet to declare marriage completely dead would be an exaggeration. The decline is real, but the picture is not uniform. In certain corners of society, marriage not only survives, but thrives. Economists Betsy Stevenson and Justin Wolfers have shown that among the highly educated, marriage rates remain comparatively strong. For college graduates in the United States, divorce rates have fallen sharply over the past 3 decades. In this group, marriage functions less as a fading tradition and more as a marker of privilege, stability, and success. Far from vanishing, it has become stratified, accessible to those with the resources to sustain it. Legal reforms have also brought undeniable benefits. The introduction of no-fault divorce, while weakening the binding nature of marriage, reduced domestic violence and allowed countless women to escape dangerous relationships. Studies published through the National Bureau of Economic Research show that after these reforms, rates of suicide among married women declined significantly. In this sense, the loosening of marital bonds has also been a liberation. Even technology, often blamed for commodifying love, has opened new doors. Michael Rosenfeld's research on online dating found that many couples who meet through apps report high levels of compatibility and satisfaction. Algorithms, for all their flaws, can connect people across lines of geography, culture, and community that once would have kept them apart. These counterpoints do not erase the larger trend, but they do complicate it. Marriage is not universally collapsing. It is evolving, stratifying, and adapting to new social realities. For some, it remains a source of resilience and fulfillment. For others, it has become less a necessity than a choice. Acknowledging these nuances does not weaken the argument, it strengthens it. For when we see marriage both as fragile and as selectively resilient, we begin to understand its true condition, not extinct, but transformed. If marriage is transforming rather than vanishing outright, the question becomes practical. What can men do in this new landscape? For men between 30 and 65, the answer is not to retreat in bitterness, but to adapt with clarity, strategy, and self-possession. Economist Gary Becker's framework reminds us that relationships operate within a kind of marketplace. Men who invest in their own health, education, financial stability, and social skills increase their value in that marketplace. This is not a cynical reduction of love to economics, but a sober recognition that commitment is more likely to endure when both partners perceive genuine benefit. Self-investment is the foundation of relational strength. Eva Illouz's analysis of emotional capitalism underscores the same point from another angle. In a culture where emotions are commodified, the man who develops emotional literacy, the ability to communicate, empathize, and regulate himself, will stand out. Emotional skills are no longer optional, they are competitive advantages. The work of John Gottman, who studied marital dynamics for decades, offers concrete tools. His research demonstrates that stable marriages maintain a ratio of at least 5 positive interactions for every negative one, and that couples must avoid what he called the 4 horsemen of relational breakdown: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. These insights translate into actionable practices: daily gratitude, constructive communication, and vigilance against corrosive patterns. Eli Finkel, in The All or Nothing Marriage, emphasizes the importance of managing expectations. Modern marriages demand more than in the past, but they cannot deliver everything. Men who approach marriage with realistic expectations, seeking companionship, partnership, and growth rather than perfection, are less likely to be disillusioned. Finkel argues that couples who invest intentional effort, treating marriage as a skill to be cultivated rather than a guarantee, stand the best chance of success. For men today, the lesson is clear. Do not expect the system to guarantee stability, and do not assume tradition will supply meaning. Instead, cultivate your own value, sharpen your emotional competence, learn the science of lasting relationships, and approach commitment as a conscious choice. In an era of liquid love, deep commitment must be built, not inherited. We began with a paradox. Weddings have never looked more dazzling, yet marriage itself is in retreat. From economics to psychology, from culture to law, the forces pulling against commitment are powerful and relentless. The institution that once anchored societies has become fluid, fragile, and uncertain. Zygmunt Bauman was right to describe our era as one of liquid love. Relationships now flow like water, changing shape to fit new desires, evaporating when pressure builds. But even in this liquid age, one truth remains. Human beings still long for stability, for bonds that endure, for commitments that give life structure and meaning. The death of marriage is not absolute, it is a warning. Marriage no longer survives on tradition, obligation, or external enforcement. It can exist only when individuals choose it consciously, sustain it deliberately, and cultivate it with skill. In this sense, modern marriage may be rarer, but it can also be deeper. The question then is not whether marriage will disappear. It is whether men and women today are willing to fight for it, not out of duty imposed from above, but out of conviction chosen from within. Liquid love offers freedom, but at the cost of fragility. Deep commitment demands effort, but yields permanence. Which will you choose?